Hey everyone, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the DIY Small Business Podcast. Really glad you're here and as always, very excited to share another interview. I'm really getting into interviewing other people now. As you know, this podcast was initially more solo episodes and that tends to be just kind of the thing. I don't know. It's the same for my other podcast, Daydream Rose, as well, where in the beginning I tend to just kind of speak to myself and then I become more courageous in inviting other people. So I'm really glad Joe Casey said yes. We talked for this interview about how she became an accidental business coach and what our businesses would be like as plants and animals. That was really funny. And we also talked about all the things that just feel exciting and challenging and wild right now. And I always feel like, oh God, it just feels so good to talk to other people and see what they're doing and how they're doing things, and just to feel a little bit less lonely in this whole exploration. Jo also told us that she found a way to make peace with marketing, which really made me feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's a good way of kind of reframing it. And yeah, it's just very complex. I can easily feel icky, and it's nice to see that we're finding and exploring ways to share that are more authentic and honest and transparent. And then finally, we also talked about how we're building businesses that support our mental health and leave space for flexibility, and how that's so often the reason that people start a business to begin with, which I think we're not talking about often enough. But yeah, so thank you for listening. Really would love to hear what you think. So feel free to send us an email or comment on the blog. A small announcement from me. The DIY business community is really coming together beautifully. We had a couple of workshops already, our first group coaching call. Today I'm running late in the afternoon a workshop on quarterly business planning. So that's kind of meant to give us a chance to take a bit of a bird's eye view on our businesses rather than just being in the day-to-day things all the time, and to really think about what our values are and how they're underpinning our decisions and our work. That's exciting. And then I'm continuously creating more content for the course part as well. If you haven't heard about it yet, the DIY business community is a monthly membership that has a very extensive video course at its core, but it's also very interactive, and over on Mighty Networks it costs $22, and you can check it out by using the 7-day free trial. All that is linked in the show notes, and if you have any questions, you're obviously super welcome to message me as well. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy me chatting to the wonderful Jo. Bye. Hi everyone, I am pleased to say this is another episode that begins with giggles. I'm speaking to the really wonderful, cool and insightful Jo Casey today. And we were just talking about the distance to space and the differences of connectivity on Zoom calls. So that was interesting, but I think we'll also talk about cool business stuff a little bit today. So Jo is running a podcast called the Meaningful Business Podcast, which was recommended to me several times. And when I first started listening, I was really surprised that it had apparently taken me so long to come across it, because it really feels exciting to tune in, and it reflects so many of the things that I think about and care about and try to explore. And so I'm also in Jo's newsletter, and I really appreciate her approach around marketing and honesty, and just the kind of like exploratory openness of seeing what business building can be like and how it can feel good, and sometimes there's unsureness or just a lot of questions, but it's just so nice to share space with other people in exploring them together, and just kind of mirroring back to each other that we're asking these questions because they are really important, even if we don't have perfect answers to them all the time. So Jo, hey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I adore you anyway, so I would be talking to you anyway. But no, it's really lovely to be here, and we started with giggles. Let's continue.
That's good, isn't it? Yeah. So I wonder if we can start by telling us telling us where you are in the world right now and what nature is like around you. I mean, well, I will say one thing about the other kind of nature in the form of books books behind you, which are fully color coordinated. And I'm just saying that because people can't see, and it's pretty great. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, I am in Greater Manchester, but I am so lucky because it takes me about 7 minutes to get to the river from my house. And so even though I'm in a pretty urban, built up area, I get to spend time with trees and by water pretty much every single day. And that is lovely. And so right now there are 2 quite big trees right outside of my window. One is deciduous, so it's just getting ready to shed its leaves because we're in September now. But the other one's a lovely evergreen fir tree. And so yeah, one of the things I love about being in the north of England particularly is how green it is, because we get a lot of rain. But that's that's the that's the silver lining of all the rain we get. We get to have this very lush kind of landscape.
Tell me about it. Yes. I really love that too. I would love to hear a little bit more about your business, about what it is that you're doing, and also maybe about the story behind that.
Sure. So I am an accidental business coach. And I say accidental because I started off as a life coach, even though I really don't jive that well with the term life coach. But so I struggled for the longest time just myself when I was a life coach helping people around resiliency about all the things that I quote unquote should be doing. Like I should be marketing myself and I should look really polished and professional all of the time. And I should be on social media all of the time. And I should be building a list and I should be selling them using certain psychological techniques, which will convince them to, and already, I'm just thinking about it, I'm getting tense. And it just seemed, first of all, the antithesis of everything that I wanted to do in the world with these tools and these skills that I have around coaching. But also, it was exhausting. This whole thing of having to put on a mask and pretend to be somebody that you're not. I am not a shiny, upbeat all of the time person. Most of us aren't, and I think if you are one of those types of people, then great. But for the rest of us, where does that leave us? And then the other thing that kind of is a recurring thing for me is we're so craving real connection, and we can't connect fully with people unless we can see the whole person. I'm not necessarily seeing you when you're 2 days before your period and you're eating chocolate and crying. We don't necessarily need to see that, but if you want to share that, fine, rock on. But this whole idea that we're supposed to tone ourselves down and fit ourselves into this really narrow little niche that is shiny and is pretty and is perfect, it's all about being positive and love and light, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And so I found myself at this crossroads, whereas I want to do this work in the world and I want to be able to, thrive through it. I want to be able to, earn a living at the very least. And yet to do that, the only path that seems open to me is becoming this person that I'm not. And I don't think I could pretend to be, even for very long. So my choice is either I give it up or I find another way. And so being that I'm a bit of an awkward sod, I decided I would try and find the other way. And so was my business journey. And then about 5 years ago, I got to the point where I was feeling pretty burnt out on working with people around resiliency, because my work is pretty deep. I don't just kind of do, here are 10 tips too. It's a lot of holding space, and I was going through stuff. I was just tired, and I didn't feel like I was bringing my best to the work. And I was working with a business strategist who said, oh, you should be working with coaches, because along the way, colleagues had asked me, well, how are you doing it? And you seem to be doing okay. You're not having to do all of that really nasty, yucky stuff. And so I switched to moving with coaches, and then that opened up to working with healers. And now I basically work with anybody who is a service-based business, solo entrepreneur, but who just doesn't jive with the whole sell, always be closing, always be on social media, shiny, bright, happy. Because that to me is just, it is such a big turn off. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying I'm an accidental business coach.
Mm-hmm.
I help people to find their thing in the world and the words to express it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty lucky in that part of my background, as I did copywriting within education for quite a long time. So I'm good at kind of
Mm-hmm.
finding the turns of phrase and ways of explaining things that maybe it's a struggle too if it's your own business because you're so close to it. And also I love working with the big thinkers. So my people just generally don't fit into a small niche, and so I work with the concept that we have an umbrella that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've got clients who are multi-passionate aromatherapists and body workers who are also coaches. That's one person. Or I've got a feminist writing coach, or somebody who works with women in midlife. So there are people who don't have these real like neat, put it in a box kind of businesses, and I help them to be able to turn that into something really magical and sustainable for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really beautiful and open and playful. And I think it's so interesting, the niching thing, isn't it? That in some ways I feel at the moment that the most important thing is to create a space in which I can be myself, and then I can figure out what I want to offer, and that can shift and change. But it's I was saying that to someone else the other day. It feels kind of more important to stay with myself and my truth and connect to my intuition than figuring out exactly who I'm talking to, because I'm actually open to talking to all kinds of people who would like to be in conversation with an authentic version of myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, that's really cool. And what are you most excited about offering at the moment? Like, what can we imagine your day-to-day life in that kind of work to be like?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the last couple of weeks of filling I do a 9-month group program. I'm saying group program, kind of pausing because it's kind of a hybrid. So it's a monthly workshops which kind of take people through a lot of the foundational pieces for a sustainable business, totally yak free. So we do things like ethical sales and all of that kind of stuff. But then there's a one-on-one element of it as well. But the main thing that really just delights me and is just gorgeous and delicious is it's a circle of women. And the support that we kind of bake in and we really work to have there is it's just magnificent to witness. It's women helping each other to see the brilliance in themselves, especially on those days when we forget or we just genuinely can't see it in us. To have people who are fellow travelers in your corner, not telling you what to do, but saying, I get it. Sometimes they'll say, maybe, I tried this and it worked for me. Have you thought about that? But a lot of the time it's about that, having those other people to kind of go, I've been there, I see it, I feel it too. And that's magnificent. So it's these lovely layers of kind of instruction and the one-to-one work and keeping people in action and this circle. That just delights me. And that's the main bulk of my work for the year. And then once that's done, I'm writing a book. I've actually got plans for 2 books in the next kind of few months. That's exciting and scary. And I'm off to Toronto to run my first overseas workshop this week, which sounds ridiculous. I have to say, there's still part of me kind of go, what, you? But that sounds, I'm really looking forward to that as well. So there's lots of, my business is very organic in the way that it grows. I mean, yes, I plan things out as a kind of thought exercise, I think. But then I love having kind of space and openness to play and get creative, and also to see what people want from me and need from me. And the really nice thing about the way that I have my business structured is that the bulk of my time and the bulk of my income comes from the 9-month program. It means it frees me up for having to be on that kind of, I'm constantly selling kind of hustle, which isn't good for a lot of us. And I found it incredibly stressful being in that kind of, I constantly have to be launching something. So it works for me just having a combination of security and open playfulness.
Yeah, that sounds really beautiful. And I also love the slowness of the program, or I'm sure that it's not feeling slow as you're in it, but giving it 9 months is what I mean to say. That feels really nice, because I feel like we're so saturated with these like 12-week courses that you pretty much do on your own, where you're kind of sold this idea of huge transformation that you're kind of having to work out entirely by yourself by watching videos in this really kind of super fast-paced container. So I think, yeah, there's a real need and an openness for longer term programs, and the commitment to a small group of people and that kind of togetherness is, I think, so important. Also because when we don't have that, and you know, it's not lying around on the street, is something, I think beautiful community is something that we have to intentionally create.
Yes.
But when we don't have it, it can really feel so tempting to seek like a false sense of belonging in spaces like Instagram. And I don't want to shame Instagram. I have really met amazing people on there, and I don't regret my time on there at all. But I did notice that sometimes when I didn't have those really more intimate spaces of really being seen and being in conversation and being able to talk about what's difficult and what's beautiful and what could be a solution, you know, the more I was then scrolling through my feed looking for that kind of thing and kind of filling that hole in a way. And that always brought up comparison to me, or this feeling of like not having grown enough yet, or not being far along in my journey. And I feel that this is then those kinds of kind of deeper dive, smaller community programs are really just the antidote to this, or like the medicine, or however you want to call it. Yeah. Is it called an antidote? I'm not, English is not.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm having a little second language moment.
You see, it's my first language and I still have to think about it. I'm like, no, I think you're right. And we can have, like you say, this almost like this false sense, or this faux idea of community in online spaces, and the online world is amazing. You know, I too have made phenomenal connections and friendships even, but if they're just kept to social media, if they're just kept to Instagram or a Facebook group, then there's always a limit to how deep that connection can be. I also think that we have this culture which is so kind of instant, you know, and this idea that it isn't instant and it isn't easy, and if it doesn't feel wonderful all of the time, then there's something wrong. And it kind of adds an extra layer onto the challenge of just being human in the world, because being human in the world is, you know, it's not the easiest task. And then you add this thing of, oh, you're doing it wrong. However you're doing it, you're doing it wrong. It's not happening fast enough. It's not happening pretty enough. It's not happening, you know, happy enough. It's like airbrushing our lives. You know, that's what social media does. It just strips things down to very minimal dimensions, and we lose nuance, and we lose the sense of reality of how long something takes, and how challenging and how joyful it can be. You know, the word, I know a lot of people choose their word of the year. I'm a bit rebellious, and so I'm not choosing one in January, but I think over the past couple of months I found my word of the season or the time, and it's nourish. And I want our online or our business experiences to be nourishing instead of hustle. You know, because we have this idea that we need to be hustling all of the time. And for a lot of us, I actually think for most of us, that's not healthy. It's not good, this idea of hustle, and you have to maybe working all the hours, because where do you find time for wondering, or for deep conversation, or for just thinking about stuff, or getting your washing done? You know, it's those day-to-day stuff. And so I really dislike this idea of this fast, instant business that we're meant to have. You know, we're meant to be hitting six figures in our first year. And the reality is that for the vast majority of people, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen for several years, if that's even what you want.
Yeah.
Who came up with this arbitrary figure?
Yeah, totally. I think it's just we hardly ever see the backstories and the labor that people have poured for years and years until they become what we then see as an overnight success. And it just creates so much pressure for everyone who witnesses that. And I think it's so human to be affected by it and really hard to step away from it. Like I'm noticing now how I'm away from social media for 3 weeks now, and I'm still hearing, as I'm in the bath or I'm going for a walk, sometimes these echoes of the stories that we're telling and retelling on social media a lot. And there's many things I miss about it. And I also want to say that sometimes I'm nervous about being forgotten, for example, or of like missing out on some kind of creative input that would inspire me in some way. But in other ways, I also feel like really this realization that there was such a fast pace in that way of being and producing content, and very little space to acknowledge that actually sometimes things are very hard and awkward and difficult. And I think what really makes me sad is that where was I going with this? Just the reality of how algorithms work. I feel so blessed about a lot of technology that we now have, and like a really deep embodied gratitude for how we can reach out to people, how we can create our own media. I know you're podcasting as well, so it's like we get to record conversations with other people now and then share them with lots of other people, and it's so cool, and we don't have to be in the same space, and it's pretty low cost. I pay a bit for my podcasting, but overall it's doable. We can do it, and that's so exciting. But social media algorithms, oh man, they really suck. And it's hard to ignore them. They're just what they are. Yeah. I wondered, if your business was an animal or plant, what would it be?
Now I'm immediately thinking what my coach would probably say, which is because there's also that kind of self-perception plus the perception of others have about you. So I'm thinking of a violet, like a creeping violet. That's what I think would be because it's always kind of a little bit under the radar. You could almost miss it if you weren't careful, but it smells so sweet when you kind of take the time to have a look, and they're pretty tenacious as well. Now I'm thinking that maybe some of my colleagues, the women that are in my circle and help to hold me up, they would be saying, no, it's something bigger, and you don't realize how big it is and the impact that you have. But so I don't know, but yeah, for me it'd be a real sweet smelling violet, this tiny little tenacious, blink and you'd almost miss it. You could easily miss it kind of walking underfoot, but it's there, and it's got kind of tendrils out.
Yeah.
How about you? I'm curious about what yours is.
Ooh, I want to admit I haven't prepared for this. I thought that was a very smart question to ask, and now I'm like, ooh. I think as a person, and I'm kind of trying and thinking at the moment about not compartmentalizing myself away from my business so much, because it's really just me, and that's the beauty of it, but also the challenge. And anyway, I think as a person I kind of identify with koala bears a lot, with how they move and live their life. And I think they are very sensual and slow, and they love food and rest. They also love community and cuddles. I love how that they hang out with their babies on their back. But yeah, I'm really resonating with their slowness, I think. And I imagine that they still have things to say, even if they don't hang out in the clearings of the jungle a lot. They're probably in their trees and their cozy spots a lot of the time. but I would hope that they still come down with cool stuff every now and then.
Yeah, I'm thinking that they must be pretty wise. They're good observers of the world as well. I want to hang out with the koalas.
And as a plant, maybe a dandelion. I feel like I've made so much stuff work in the first few years of my business. I started really quite deep in depth and just made it work in different environments. I'm fascinated and just impressed by how dandelion can, really grow through concrete and sometimes, and how they spread and how they're very. I think maybe what I see myself reflected in is like this, like they have a beautiful flower, but it's pretty. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple in a way, and that's how I love and to work with tags. I really just love simple, beautiful things that just work well and that are made to last. They're not just setups that you're gonna have to renew in half a year or something. And that seems like a dandelion kind of thing to me.
Oh, I love that. I'm thinking of the dandelion clock as well. That kind of that, and it's so beautiful. But there's a real elegance to the way that, though, because it's almost like this little bomb that kind of goes off and spreads everywhere in the most beautiful way. I'm making lots of hand gestures, podcast listeners, that you cannot see. I love that. I'm a bit jealous of your
We can totally share that. You can have some dandelion in your business.
Oh, thank you.
What are you most excited about in being an entrepreneur at the moment?
So about 18 months ago, around about the time I was having a bit of a nervous breakdown, like that, and I'm not saying that as a kind of a euphemism. I was genuinely having a nervous breakdown. I was not in a good place. But one of the things that kind of I clung on to as I was kind of coming back was, I mean, it's partly connected to the whole idea of that, well, I'm not kind of shiny, I'm not bright, I'm not upbeat all the time. I do have mental health challenges, and I can see lots of other people who have similar kind of challenges or similar kind of makeup and patterns. I think entrepreneurship appeals to us in a way because the traditional world of work doesn't necessarily work that well for us. It certainly wasn't set up for folks like me, but then kind of turn that around and go, okay, so how can we turn that into a feature rather than a bug? And so it's really kind of grown in strength, this idea that, do you know what, I am not going to let this quite young, fresh, online technological business space, or technology-driven space, I should say, be dominated by these kind of very macho, I'm going to spend, $10,000 a month on Facebook ads, marketers. I'm going to do, all these ads about how I can totally change your life in just 5 minutes. And I don't want them to be the ones who get to dominate it. And what if the rest of us got to say, oh no, we get to define this too, because it's still emerging, it's still being defined. And so what excites me is the fact that there are all of these people, it's like these little dots all over the world, kind of are connecting up. And we're all these fellow travelers are kind of saying, okay, well, what if we do it this way? Have you tried doing it that way? And almost embracing the fact that there is no one way of doing it. So stop pretending that there is, bro marketer dude. And how about we actually get to define this the way that we want to, in a much more human way? Because if we've taken this idea that, late stage capitalism, that the idea that, resources are there to be exploited. If you think about the whole climate crisis that's come about because as humans we had this stupid, naive, selfish idea that the Earth's natural resources were there to be exploited to depletion. And the capitalist kind of work ethic idea is that, oh well, your workforce are also people to be exploited. You know, like how many hours can we get? If we didn't have employment law that says there's a limit on how many hours people can work, do you honestly think that we wouldn't have like 12 15-hour days and people sleeping under their sewing machines like they do in some parts of the world? Of course we would. We are not great as humans, as kind of when we come at it through that lens of people are just resources. And so if we want to do our lives differently, and we can use having our own business as a vehicle for that as well, then we have to look at it totally differently. We cannot see ourselves being our main resource as something there to be exploited to depletion. And that's where burnout, that's where I was, 18 months ago. That's where burnout comes from, and that's what hustle culture tells us. And so what really excites me is the idea, okay, well, we can use this technology, we can harness it, and we can harness the ideas of all of these other fellow travelers to say, how can we do this in a way that is going to work on a human scale, that is going to be sustainable, not just, environmentally, but also energetically, financially, emotionally. How can we do that? Let's do that. That really excites me, this idea that I did this project a few months ago called the Messy Meaningful Business Project, and it was just about gathering together fellow travelers to share their experiences, to share what had worked for them, what hadn't worked, a bit about their business journeys, in the with the idea that these things are messy, they're not neat, they're not pristine, they're certainly not perfect. And what can we learn from that? And what can we share that will be of use to other people along the path? That excites me a lot.
Yeah, me too. And I wonder then, what feels challenging to you at the moment? What kind of big questions are you sitting with?
So the big questions are things like, I talk a lot about this concept of feminine conditioning, like who particularly I work predominantly with women, and there are some challenges there that come with going against our conditioning. And our conditioning for women generally is around things like, don't be too visible, don't take up too much space, be that physical, be that socially, don't be too opinionated, dial it down. And there's, there is a thread in the online world around trolling, and even if it hasn't happened to you individually, then there's already an inbuilt fear in the system, because we know what happens to opinionated women or women who get too big for their boots and things like that. And so how we kind of approach all of that, how we address our feminine conditioning, how we work with the challenges that brings with it, that feels hard sometimes. That feels, like a challenge. Not that it's insurmountable, but that it's challenging. And in all honesty, the world also feels hard. You and I both live in the United Kingdom. It's a shit show right now. What? Yeah. So as we record this in September, we have no idea what's happening with Brexit. We know that we have an incredibly right-wing, mendacious government who are in control of something. I don't know quite what it is. And there's that whole kind of polarization. There's a real viciousness that's around. There's a real kind of, I'm heartsick, at least at some point during pretty much every day, just about some of the things that go on in the world. And I struggle with that. How much do you expose yourself to it in terms of news and staying aware? And then how much do you, protect yourself from it, and how to be engaged and still useful from an activist or even just good human point of view, compared to, I just want to run away and pretend none of this is happening. That is, I think that's one of the most challenging things that I find. Where is that line? Where is that balance? And it's very much a swirling sand of crap. It's really, seriously, it's really hard. It's also that sense of there's so much kind of pain and suffering in the world and immediately around me, and I am just one person. And this whole dichotomy of what social media has done, and this idea of bringing us together, it's actually polarized us even more, and that's such a hard nut to crack. And I don't have any answers. I have lots and lots of questions.
Yeah,
that feels hard and challenging.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Thank you for sharing. I wonder, and this is maybe something that we would only touch on a little bit, or like, go as far and wide as you like. I'm just saying, I understand it's another really big question, and I'm not really expecting you to have like a perfect answer to it. But I'm wondering what your relationship to marketing is like at the moment, and how that has changed over time.
I think I've made peace with it of sorts. So it's interesting because my coach will quite often say to me, your business is so meta. Because I teach the stuff that I also find challenging, So it's and that's why the 9-month program that I run isn't just, I'm going to teach you the steps, I'm going to teach you some strategy. There is some strategy there, but I'm always really interested in, okay, so we can know the strategy, or a strategy, and we can decide on which strategy is going to work for us, because there's never a one size fits all. But then how do we make sure we implement that? How do we make sure that we keep committing to showing up? How do we market if we're, I don't want to give Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook any of my money and time, and I know that every minute I spend on Facebook is, because we are the product of it. So I've definitely got better at the showing up, and the showing up consistently. And so the way that I kind of frame marketing for myself, and the way that I find works most effectively, is it's a conversation. And I am not somebody who's going to be on social media every day, sending an email out to my my community every day, unless I have something to say. And I'm okay with that. That being said, there are also times when fear, or that imposter complex, or the little needly voice in my head says, oh, you've got nothing to say. No one wants to listen to you. And so the challenge is knowing how to decipher which is, oh, I genuinely don't think I've got anything to say, or fear is telling me I've got nothing to say. So I've definitely got better at showing up more consistently, sharing my opinions, telling people how I can help them, if they're the right person for this, if they're telling them that the benefits of the work that I do, really standing by my body of work. And also to kind of go, do you know what, I don't want to be adding to the noise. So if you get a podcast from me every 2 weeks, I'm fine with that. I don't need to be doing one every week. If you don't get a newsletter from me for 3 weeks, don't fret. The next one will usually, hopefully, have something useful. And if not, I'd just be telling you about my day out with the kids, because it's in school holiday. So I've got much better at kind of owning my authentic voice. That sounds terribly coachy.
No, but yeah, it is true.
And just coming and give myself permission to come at it from a very genuine and human place. One of the biggest breakthroughs, I suppose it's actually a recurring breakthrough, is the more I show up as myself, even though that voice in my head says people don't want to hear about your breakdown, or your anxiety, or this conversation that you had with this person, but but the more I do share the actual kind of honest, unpolished version of, this is what I found that works, this is what didn't work for me, this is what does work for other people. Sorry.
That's okay. I have a dog too. I can drive on the background.
But the more people respond, and that, that's the thing I always wish I could go back and tell the me of 5 years terrified of kind of showing up authentically. And that is what I teach my clients now. It's like, this will feel counterintuitive, because all of our culture says you have to be a certain way to be acceptable. But in reality, the more you can show up as you and share genuinely what you have to offer people, then the more people are going to respond.
Yeah, it's very true. And I so relate to it also being sometimes counterintuitive. I feel like I'm still in my 5th year bumping up against that all the time, and maybe a little bit longer, but I'm kind of like really, really ready to let it go. It's going to be great. Yes. That also brings me to my last question is, what do you wish you had known sooner?
It takes a lot longer than any of these marketing people trying to sell you a course tells you it's going to be. It takes longer for a few reasons. It was just going to take you a lot longer to find your voice and to find your way of doing. And it's always going to be trial and error. There is no one way. There is no one course you can buy, one coach you can hire who is going to give you that kind of that shortcut to finding that.
Yeah.
And I really wish it would have just taken a lot of the pressure off myself early on. But also, if I can have a second one, a lot of the things that I think we're told are moving us forward are actually just keeping us spinning in the same place. So like doing a load of stuff on social media, if you haven't actually decided or discovered or dug into what is it you have to say to people, you know, what is your thing, what's your message, that's just taking up a whole load of time. And you don't need a logo.
Yes.
I mean, I love my logo, but I didn't get that till I was like 2-3 years in, and I adore it now. But I can remember spending weeks and weeks and weeks just agonizing over what logo to have. It really doesn't matter. A logo is not a business.
It is incredible how much headspace a logo can take up. I have recently interviewed someone, this must be like 2 or 3 episodes back, I think, about flexible branding. That made a lot of sense to me. It was a lot about just like feeling and thinking about the colors that you really enjoy and the kinds of fonts that you think illustrate your message. But other than that, just keeping it pretty simple, you know? Yeah, so that is fantastic advice to your younger self, I think. Thank you. Please tell us what you're currently offering and where people can find you if they want to know more.
Well, depending on when this goes out, the group program that I was talking about is called the Supernova Collective, and that starts on the 1st of October. And that's an annual thing. Other than that, I have something called the Meaningful Biz Academy, which I'm going to be revamping once I've had the launch of the Supernova done, which is it's a community project, and it's about how you can get some of that support and that kind of circle, and also some of the kind of in-time strategic advice. But with that, if you don't have the resources or without the time and the money investment to hire a coach kind of full time, and that's just really lovely. You get, you know, there are some courses in there. There's a membership community, and there's courses in there, and there's a community that goes alongside that. But then we also have monthly co-working, and we also have monthly group coaching. It's just lovely. We just like to hang out and love on each other, and to kind of do loads of strategic stuff. I do have an option for people to work with me one-on-one. Again, that's in the process of being revamped at the moment, but you can find details of all of that at joecasey.com. And I do hang out on Instagram. Instagram is probably my favourite, I suppose, social media platform. Oh, I even hate the word platform. I'm Jo Casey B on Instagram, and come and say hi.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, Jo, for everything that you shared and for telling us more about your story and your perspectives. It was really, really beautiful to talk to you, and I'm excited to share this with everyone. And we'll also link to your links in the show notes, so if anyone didn't catch that they can totally check it out there. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.